Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you very much. This is my first time at the conference in Budapest and my first ever conference talk. So it's really exciting to be here. You'll notice some overlap in the pictures that Carlo and I have used because we're sharing photos that both of us have taken. Yeah, my name is Georgia. I'm a PhD student at Durham University. And today I'll be talking about the transition from prosocial understanding to prosocial action and the role of the socio-cultural learning environment in this. So, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, prosocial behavior is any behavior that's carried out to benefit another person. And as a species, humans are incredibly prosocial, and we begin to help unfamiliar others reliably within the second year of life, with this behavior frequency increasing as we grow older. Furthermore, it's a very cross-culturally prevalent behavior, with this behavior being noted in multiple countries across at least 4 continents. And if I gave a list of all the prosocial studies that are out there, it would be a whole slide, so I'm sorry if I've neglected any. So there are many reasons why infants might help, and there's quite a vivid debate about, why they begin. And the main theories are, one is that infants have a desire for social interaction with an adult. Another is that infants have this preference for completing a goal-directed action, so they like putting an object into an adult's hand. But arguably, if these are the answers to why they do it, it's not really a prosocial behavior. So for it to truly be called prosocial, there has to be some sort of indication that the infants understand the needs of others. So it has been found that from a very young age, infants are sensitive to others' needs. However, not many studies have linked this understanding to the behavior itself. So one study by Koster and colleagues found that this cognitive understanding of needs was linked to helping behavior when the moderators of fine motor skills and social interaction skills were included, which sort of suggests that there are numerous skills needed in order for helping behavior to actually happen. So not only do you need to understand others' needs, you also need to have the fine motor skills to physically pick up an object and hand it to another person. And you also need to understand the concept of social interaction, or another way of explaining this is they need to understand how reciprocity works. So in a social interaction task, this is when you roll an object to an infant and you expect the object to come back. And by doing this, it's used often as a warm-up task. By doing this, the infant learns about the norm of reciprocity and why it's important. So infants that understand and kind of are sensitive to this norm are more likely to then help later on. So although infants are sensitive to others' needs before they actually act it out behaviorally, there isn't any longitudinal study looking at the needs understanding before their first birthday and their later prosocial behavior after their first birthday. So this is something that we were interested in looking at. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, there is a weird bias within developmental research. So a lot of the studies that I've already quoted, they fall victim to this bias, whereby predominantly Western cultural contexts are studied. And this means that there isn't a lot of consideration about the cross-cultural variation with this behavior and the potential variation in the mechanisms. So the studies that have been done cross-culturally have suggested that there's no cross-cultural difference in the what of helping, so whether they do actually help, but rather there's a difference in the why of helping. So why is an infant motivated to help someone else? And this goes back to the autonomous relational socialization goals nominated by Heidi Keller in 2007. So you can divide societies on a scale between autonomous and relational. So within a Western cultural context, we believe in autonomous socialization goals. So we put an emphasis on independence and independence of thought, autonomy, and enjoyment. So we want, if we want an infant to help, we want to teach them why they should be helping. but we also want them to enjoy the process. So we often have scenarios with infants where we encourage them to see the fun in helping and not just it be a chore. However, a relational cultural context would emphasize the serving others and interpersonal responsibility. So it's not that you should want to help, but you just have to do it. And this is particularly in the case in a cultural context where there's a strict hierarchy. So you should be serving others as much as you can. So this is, shocker, I'm going to be talking about Uganda. So Uganda provides quite an interesting backdrop to study prosocial understanding and prosocial behavior. It's previously been shown that the rural society in Budongo, it's a relational society. They have relational socialization goals, and they show a lot of distributed caregiving, which is what Carlo was referencing before, that there are multiple people to look after babies, and there's much more group. The group holds a lot of importance within their society. So they might, their why of helping might be quite different to a Western cultural context. And if serving another person is that important within an interaction, it might suggest that they would also respond differently to a warm-up social interaction task, because they'll be maybe focused on their partner as opposed to focused on the game that they're playing. And this might in turn increase their helping behavior. And you might have been wondering why we also, like in Carlo's study, why we were interested in also an urban sample. Countries like Uganda are increasingly urbanized and westernized. So we wanted to add another cultural context, which is ecologically very similar to Budongo, but that may show variation in terms of their socialization goals, and also in terms of like education, media access, etc. So none of this is new, but our study sites. So we had Budongo in Western Uganda. It is, a very typical relational society. There's very low education levels. I think with the exception of 2, I don't think any of the mothers we tested finished primary school. There's little to no media exposure, and it's shown to be a relational society previously. The reason I bring up media exposure is it's quite a good measure of how westernized a society is. Then we had Murokore in southwest Uganda. As you can see, that it was quite a large sample size. It was very heterogeneous with varied levels of income, education, and media access. And then we have Durham in the northeast of England, which is a typical Western society. High education, total media exposure, and an autonomous society. So we had 3 main research questions. So we first wanted to see, do infants understand others' needs at 10 months in 3 different sociocultural contexts? This was of interest because it's before the first year of life, there isn't likely to be much cultural variation. This is what we believe so far anyway, so it was interesting to look at a cross-culturally. The second one, does needs understanding at 10 months interact with fine motor skills and social skills at 16 months to predict helping behavior at 16 months? And does the effect of priming of reciprocal action, that is, does completing a social interaction task, does it differ by site, and does that then predict helping behavior? So we assumed that the infants would understand others' needs across sites. We didn't expect any difference. We assumed that, like the previous study, needs understanding would interact with fine motor skills and social skills to predict helping behavior. And we also predicted that Ugandan infants would be more responsive to the social interaction task, and that this would positively predict their helping behavior. So to measure needs understanding, we used a well-replicated eye tracking paradigm designed by Koster and colleagues, which has been done in Germany and Japan previously, but it had not been done in an African context with such a large sample size. So you'll see this was also used in Carlo's presentation, but it was a very similar setup. So an infant sat in front of a screen, and there was an eye tracker, and they sat with their mum. The mum's eyes were covered so that we didn't track her eye movements. And yeah, they watched 8 trials where they saw 2 figures, one who was in need of help and one that was not in need of help. I'll show you a video of this now in a second. And we were interested in 2 main measures, so I'll show you that now. So we first wanted to see who the helper would look at first.
Oh.
We also wanted to see how long they looked at the screen. So we wanted to first see if they looked at the character in need first, in anticipation, and we also wanted to see would they look at the screen longer when the character not in need received help in sort of surprise. Oh, sorry. We also looked at helping behavior using the classic out of reach paradigm, where an object is dropped and we just see if the infant gives it back. They were given 30 seconds to do so. We also made sure that the objects dropped were culturally relevant to them. Oh, sorry. We also looked at fine motor skills, and this was measured using a well-replicated scale, and they were measured on a Likert scale. And finally, we looked at social skills using a social interaction task where an object was rolled to the infant, and we just saw if they rolled it back. And so we took the number of times they successfully rolled it back. So first of all, we found that across all sites, infants tended to look first at the character in need in anticipation that they would be helped. So yeah, needy character was looked at first over the non-needy character. And secondly, we found that at all sites, infants stared longer at the screen when the non-needy character received help. This was indicating that they were surprised by the outcome, so they were expecting that the needy character would be the one to receive help. We then combined these scores to create a needs understanding kind of composite score, and inserted it into a beta regression model, which allows for a proportion as a dependent variable. We did not find any interactions like we predicted, but we did find main effects of the 3 things we expected. So needs understanding, fine motor skills, and social interaction skills. However, sight, there was no difference. So as you can see here, all 3 aspects, they positively predicted the likelihood of an infant engaging in helping behavior. So if I quickly go back to my research questions, we did find that infants across sites were able to distinguish a character in need from a non-needy character. And yeah, it seems to be a kind of a culturally robust finding. We did not find any interaction like we predicted. However, the variables we had, they were all significant predictors as main effects. They didn't interact with each other like we thought they would. And we did not find any effect of priming of reciprocal action. It didn't differ by site, and although it did predict it on its own, just regardless of where they were. So by 10 months, it seems that infants across 3 different socio-cultural contexts in rural and urban Uganda and in the UK can differentiate non-needy from needy characters, which suggests a pre-verbal and a pre-behavioral prosocial understanding. Needs understanding does predict behavior, which suggests that helping behavior is prosocial, but we can't ignore the role that fine motor skills and social interaction skills also play in this relationship. And no clear sight differences were detected, which is quite an exciting finding. And it suggests that these abilities are not contingent on culture, and they're quite robust. But future research could determine if these effects continue to play a role in prosocial behavior cross-culturally, or if the predictors diverge, as has been previously found. So essentially, if the infant gets older, do different factors play a different role in helping behavior? So, as the old proverb goes, it takes many villages in many continents to make a research project. So I have many people to thank, including my collaborators, my supervisor, everyone who helped with coding, with collecting data, and all of my funders. So thank you so much for your attention. Oh, I'd also like to thank all the mothers and babies who participated, because we couldn't have it without them. So thank you so much, and I'm very open to questions or comments.
Again, a few minutes for questions.
Thank you for a really cool research presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. I had a question about the why for altruism and the way in which you sketched out the different types of motivation for that why and how it might vary across in kind of more individualistic versus relational cultures. And I was wondering whether you knew of research that had been done, say, within the UK about this, because one doesn't need to go very far from Durham city centre to find less affluent parts of the northeast, for instance, where the why for helping might look closer to the relational one, because people have to pull together to make it through, because families are finding it really tough there, and life is tough, and there's low educational achievement. So I was wondering, kind of, within the UK or within a culture that we kind of easily homogenize as individualistic, whether you would expect to see these changes dependent on kind of demographic issues.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. And it is something we've been asked before. If we look at urban and rural Uganda, why don't we look at, differences within the UK as well? I'd say the first thing I would say is there's just nothing really done, as far as I'm aware, I'm open to correction, within the differences like in the UK. But I would imagine, I'm guessing by your accent that you're from the UK, or yes, that there is definitely like a north-south divide. So I definitely would expect something there. It's just we can't, it would be harder to make it a kind of a one study if we did like north and south UK and then urban rural Uganda. But I would be very interested and curious, and I think a kind of a next step for cross-cultural research is not necessarily looking at the huge differences amongst countries, but also looking at specific groups within societies. I would imagine, I wouldn't think there'd be massive differences, but I'm not totally sure. I wonder if maybe like resource allocation might be different in the north compared to the south of England. But yeah, I'm not particularly sure, but I think you raise a really interesting point, so thank you.
Hi, it's not a question, but it's just more of a comment based on the last question. Just because I was involved in the recruiting of participants from the Northeast, and so I think that actually we had a more heterogeneous group and less of a high SES group in our Durham study than probably most university-based studies do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess, the variation within the UK was also, I think, compared to most studies, pretty high.
Because we had quite a few from like Middlesbrough and just a lot of the like less affluent areas as well. So there was quite a mix. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for a very interesting talk. I might have missed this point, so it's more like a clarification question. So you found a correlation between the fine motor skills, the social skills, and the need understanding, but did you find differences in these skills between the sites in the first place?
Yes, that's an excellent question. No. We were actually expecting differences, particularly in motor skills, but I think, so social skills, there was no difference, needs understanding, no difference. Fine motor skills, there were differences depending on which measure it was. So holding a pen would be quite unusual in Uganda. They don't do much of it. So the UK infants were great at that, but the Ugandan infants were wonderful at drinking from a cup, whereas the UK infants liked to pick it up and just tip it over their head or tip it on the table or something. So I think if you looked at specific individual tasks, you would find that it would work differently. But because we were looking at all in one kind of measure, there was no difference.
Okay, I think we have to move on. Thanks again, Georgia.